Salve omnes. Okay, we have now gone over almost half of the Olympians. Today we're going to shift from the gods to the goddesses, although we do have one or two more gods left over. So today we are talking about Demeter. Her Roman name is Ceres. Demeter, the goddess of agriculture. The first thing you will notice about Demeter is that she looks very plain, like all the other goddesses do pretty much. Whereas the male gods have their very distinguishing features. Some of them look a lot older, some of them look a lot younger, some of them have very, very notable objects such as the lightning bolt or the trident or the caduceus or an axe. The goddesses are going to be a little bit more difficult to tell the difference if it's just them by themselves. So here we have Demeter. She is a goddess. And just from the sculpture, you can't really tell which goddess it is. You'll notice that the hair, the face, even the clothing is not really going to be very different from goddess to goddess. So you're going to need a lot more context. Demeter is the goddess of agriculture. That means grains like wheat and corn and barley and spelt, things like that. Things that grow from the ground that produce bread. Her Roman name Ceres is where we derive the word cereal. So think about cereal. She is the goddess of cereal. Here's a very archaic looking Demeter. Generally I stick to classical or post-classical art, but it's always good to show what some primitive Greek artwork looked like. And you'll notice that the symbols that you see on her are evocative of growth, like wheat growing in fields. And she has some sort of headdress, maybe a crown or something to that effect. The classical Demeter, again, is going to look like pretty much the other goddesses. Again, we need context to tell us where it's from. And you can see any goddess wearing a crown. That doesn't necessarily mean that she is Hera, the queen of the gods. Just that it's typical to see a headdress or crown or something like that on a Greek goddess's head. They are all goddesses, of course. Here we see her seated, again being waited on here. Any god or goddess might be seated, especially if in the picture you see lesser gods or demigods or even mortals bringing them some sort of offering. And here you can see that the offering presented to her is in fact grain, that is wheat or some other sort of grain. The Romans had a lot of grains that we don't hear about too much, like spelt, ancient grains. Corn, as we know it, wasn't that well known to the Greeks and Romans. So think primarily things like wheat. So her symbols will generally be food items. So you might see a basket of wheat or a shock of wheat, which is wheat bundled together, which is how torches were made in the ancient world. So we might see something that looks like a torch or an actual torch, because if you think about, take a lot of wheat and tie it really, really tight together, and that's gonna be something that burns really, really slowly. And here again, we see her kind of seated. Not that she's really a queen of anything, but she, of course, is a goddess. And agriculture to the ancients was incredibly important, especially for big cities like Rome or to the Greeks, Athens. They depended on carbs, wheat, grains, in order to feed their population, because it's one of the most efficient plants to generate lots and lots and lots and lots of food. And it can be dried and it can be stored. And when there were famines, major problems happened in the ancient world. So I've included some modern renderings of Demeter, just to mix things up as usual. So generally in modern renderings she'll be depicted with the color green to symbolize growth. She's going to be associated with the seasons, like the fall and the harvest. We'll get to her daughter Persephone in a few minutes here. Demeter and Persephone are frequently featured together, kind of associated with the same thing, the seasons, the harvest. So here we actually see like the greens turning into browns. And notice corn here. Here's a different modern rendering of Demeter. So as you think about what you want your Demeter to look like, keep that in mind. There's nothing wrong for you to add some things you get from some modern depictions. Another one here. Apparently, drawing Demeter is very popular in modern times. Bountiful wheat harvest, etc. Okay, so Demeter is not featured in very many stories. She's really only featured in the story about her daughter, Persephone. Persephone is the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. Yes, Zeus is married to Hera, but as we all know, Zeus is not a good husband. Go back and watch the Zeus video. I kind of talked about that a lot. Like, he's not a role model. He's not a good man. He does not treat his wife with any level of respect. So here we see both Demeter and Persephone with these the same sort of objects, that is, bundles of wheat, torches. And notice that Demeter here does look queenly. Actually, she has what sort of looks like a crown, and she's seated, whereas Persephone is standing. You'll notice that it says Kore here. Kore is just the Greek word that means girl, and it was frequently used to refer to Persephone. Okay, so the story of Demeter and Persephone involves this man. So you might take a look at him, and you might think, well, that looks like Zeus or Poseidon, and you'd be correct. This is Hades. His Roman name is Pluto, and Hades is another son of Kronos and Rhea. That is Zeus/Jupiter, Poseidon/Neptune, and Hades/Pluto are the three sons of Kronos and Rhea. They had 6 children in total. Demeter was one of the daughters, along with Hera and Hestia. So Hades is not considered one of the 12 Olympians because he doesn't live on Mount Olympus. So I'm including him only in this Demeter folder because he's not even an Olympian. So Hades, when Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades met to divide up power of the universe, Hades didn't get the really good deal here. Zeus got the earth and the sky. Poseidon got the oceans. Hades was stuck with the underworld. And the underworld is a place where monsters are relocated. Like we've talked about the Cyclopes or the Hecatonchires being locked up in the underworld. And also it's where souls of deceased humans are going to go. So Hades is the king of the underworld. Again, his Roman name is Pluto. And Hades was lonely because there are no other gods around. He can't leave the underworld. In fact, he only ever does once. He doesn't go to Mount Olympus. He doesn't visit Mount Olympus. He doesn't attend parties there. So very simply, he's just the guy that lives downstairs. He lives down in like what is imagined as this giant cavern underground. Now, don't think that it's, if you have seen the Disney movie Hercules, don't think that it's on fire or that his head is on fire. Those are things that are from way later time periods that don't have anything to do with classical mythology. You will probably recognize his 3-headed puppy. He's a very good boy. His name is Cerberus. We'll talk about him a lot more in our Hercules folder. Hades here, sitting on his throne. He is the king of the underworld. Zeus, king of the sky and earth. Poseidon, king of the oceans. And Hades, king of the underworld. Here you'll notice he looks very much like Zeus. There's a very famous sculpture by Bertolini. Bernini. Notice the crown. And notice the Zeus and Poseidon-like features. Well, here we see him again. Again, very Zeus-like. Here we see him. He looks like Zeus and he has a cornucopia. Now, we associate the cornucopia with agriculture, not with death. But think about the Greek conception of death going to the underworld. Where do plants grow from? They grow from the ground. So there's going to be this connection between the underworld and fertility of agriculture. And here's a really good one of that very good boy, that triple very good boy, Cerberus. Again, we'll talk about it more in our Hercules folder, but here we see Hades or Pluto again. And here we see him with Persephone. Notice the cornucopia again and his Zeus-like features. Here's a different, okay. This one might be a little bit difficult to see. You'll be able to zoom in as you look at the pictures on your own in the folder in Google Drive. But this is the abduction of Persephone. Basically, Hades saw Persephone and just kidnapped her and took her down to the underworld, and nobody knew where she went. And down there, she eats a few seeds of the pomegranate fruit, which means that she cannot leave the underworld. It's a really famous painting of her in the pomegranate. If you haven't had a pomegranate, it's a fruit that has many, many, many seeds. It's very messy fruit. And Persephone becomes Hades' wife. And they live together as king and queen of the underworld. Here we see many, many symbols of agriculture, farming, wheat, chicken, etc. And here as they sit, king and queen. But there's a problem. Persephone was kidnapped. Demeter didn't know where she was, so Demeter became very, very sad. And Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, when she gets sad, crops don't grow anymore. They all die. There's a giant famine. And Zeus considered this to be a major problem because Zeus wants mortals to worship him and offer sacrifices to him. And if they all starve to death and die, they can't do that. So Zeus figures out that Demeter is sad because Persephone is missing. Zeus figures out where Persephone is in the underworld with Hades, and Zeus figures out a deal. And that is that on an annual basis, Persephone will come back from the underworld in the spring. And generally it's the number of seeds that she ate in her pomegranate that dictate how many months she has to spend in the underworld, either 3 or 4 or 6, depending on what version you're listening to. So here we see Hermes, we've already done Hermes, so you can recognize him by the caduceus and his funky hat, leading Persephone up to Demeter, who's waiting for her. This is Hecate, a minor goddess of the underworld, helping out. Here's a more famous painting of it. You can see Hermes with his really fancy caduceus there and his cool hat, leading Persephone up to Demeter for their reunion. Here's another one of the reunion of Demeter and Persephone. And here we see Persephone with Hades, and notice his cornucopia, living together in the underworld. That would symbolize the fall and the winter, whereas being up in the upper world symbolizes the spring and summer. And while we're talking about the underworld, we should mention this guy. His name is Charon, and he is the boatman that takes your soul across the river Styx into Hades. You'll notice that Hermes here is leading a soul about to get on the boat. You're probably familiar with the fact that they would put a coin either in the eye or the mouth or both of a Greek or Roman when they died, so that they could pay the ferryman Charon to take them across the river Styx into the underworld, where Hades will be the ruler. Here's a medieval version of Charon, who kind of appears like the Grim Reaper sort of a thing. Okay. So again, today we talked about Demeter. Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, famous for her story about her daughter Persephone, who is married to, oh, that's what I was going to say right there. Yeah, 2 different angles of the same vase right there to give you a better close-up. Hades, the god of the underworld. Again, Demeter, also known as Ceres, agriculture, growth, the harvest. Okay. Wale te omnes.